next up we have a pinch hitter who will do a fine job. On the agenda you have in your packet, it says that Andy Drake from Spectra Energy is speaking. He's got a stand-in today. Rick, oh, I always get your last name right, wrong. Kivela? Kivela, who is the Director of Operational Compliance for Spectra Energy. Andy got called off. You may hear there's a little merger going on between Enbridge and Spectra, and I think that's more complicated than I can even imagine, and Andy got tasked with dealing with some of that just in the last few days. So Rick is pinch hitting, and he will do a fine job. It's all yours. Up and down there, and there's a timer that will warn you.
All right. Thanks, Carl. Andy Drake does send his apologies. He wanted to be here to address this issue on the proposed rule, and he sends his apologies. Just some things with the merger came up that prevented his attendance. I do want to thank Carl and the Pipeline Safety Trust for this annual meeting. I think this is really a great forum for us to exchange ideas, better understand each other, and so thanks for that, Carl. I think it's also important that this panel include an operator's perspective, because at the end of the day, the final rule gets issued. The operator is the one that's going to have to implement the requirements. So we want to have some conversation about making sure the rules are effective and efficient and can be implemented in a practical way. So a little bit about Spectra Energy's U.S. gas transmission system. We have over 12,000 miles of gas transmission pipelines crossing 26 states. So any type of rulemaking has a significant impact on us, and I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about it. Spectra Energy is a member of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, or INGA. Back in 2011, INGA developed some guiding principles and an integrity management continuous improvement initiative that really was driving to address the same safety concerns and mandates that the proposed rule for gas transmission and gathering pipelines are intending to address. And so we're really very supportive of the overarching concepts that are included in this proposed rule. We just think that there's some refinement in the proposal that's necessary to make it more effective, more efficient, and something that an operator can implement in a practical way. We do support regulations that embrace and advance improvements in pipeline safety practices with a goal of achieving zero incidents. I think that is something we all share, is a drive to zero pipeline safety incidents. The proposed rule itself is rather significant. The pre-publication version was 550 pages, so there's a lot that's included in this rule. And Spectra Energy recognizes that it had to be a big rule. There are a lot of congressional mandates, NTSB recommendations that had to be addressed, and also to address some pipeline safety concerns that were highlighted with some incidents that have occurred over the last 5 to 8 years. So we recognize that a significant rule was necessary. With a significant rulemaking like this, PHMSA ended up with hundreds of comments, and I can only imagine the effort it's taking for Alan and his staff to go through all those comments and try to address them all in trying to prepare a final rule. So I know that it's a big effort for you, Alan. I'm going to touch just on some of the key provisions of the rule. There's a lot in that rule. I'm not going to touch on everything. Spectra Energy submitted some rather lengthy comments, as did a lot of other operators and INGA. But I did want to touch on a few items just briefly. Over the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen a great increase in the number of gathering pipelines that are being built to address some of the shale gas production. And what we're seeing is there's some of these pipelines are large diameter, high pressure, high stress pipelines that look a lot like transmission lines. Spectra thinks it's reasonable that those types of pipelines have a minimum set of safety standards that they all have to apply to all those pipelines. We think that there is a place with the lower stress lines, the small diameter lines in remote areas where state regulation is still appropriate. But for the higher stress lines, we think a set of standards is reasonable, so we support PHMSA's efforts there. Pipeline operators have already extended integrity management activities beyond HCA's, and we think that it is reasonable to have a set of minimum federal standards to apply to areas outside of high consequence areas. PHMSA's proposal is to apply those requirements to what they call moderate consequence areas, and that seems like a logical approach, to focus those efforts on places where people might be expected to be. We do have some concerns on the definition of the MCAs, and we think there needs to be some refinements. So the operator that is out has to identify all of those MCAs has a way to do that we can identify these areas, and so we know where to apply these new requirements. Spectra believes that it's fundamentally important to know the key attributes of our pipeline systems. So the pipe attributes that go into determining MAOP are those attributes that are used to make decisions on integrity management practices or our O&M practices. And we believe that we need to have traceable, verifiable, and complete records to back up those attributes. So we are supportive of the requirements that are in the rule. I think there is some refinement there. There are some attributes that PHMSA is proposing in the rule that really won't drive any decisions. Pipe chemistry, for example, isn't anything that's going to be used to calculate an MAOP. It's not going to drive any decisions or actions on the pipeline. And so some of those efforts don't seem to be worth doing. So we would encourage some changes to what is required as far as pipe attributes. The rule would also allow non-destructive testing for pipe attributes where we are missing records, and we really support that. Over the last few years, we've seen some real improvements in technology that allow us to estimate yield strengths and get pipe chemistries, if we have to have them, non-destructively. That really helps the operator to be able to get those attributes and not have to take the pipeline out of service to cut out samples of pipe to send to the lab. It really helps too with a reduction in the methane emissions. If we can do it non-destructively, that's a significant issue for pipeline operators. We're supportive of MAOP re-verification as it's proposed in the rule, and we think that PHMSA has given us a reasonable amount of time to do that, so we're very supportive of that. The proposed rule will significantly expand the use of pressure testing. Alan mentioned the grandfather pipelines that haven't been tested, and we're supportive of doing some hydrostatic testing in those areas. But we believe that the standard subpart J test is adequate for re-verifying MAOP. In some places, PHMSA would propose to require spike hydro testing, where the first half hour of the pressure test would be at a higher level. And we don't believe that's warranted for MAOP verification. Spike hydro testing is a very valuable tool for a time-dependent cracking threat, such as stress corrosion cracking, and we've done a lot of that spike testing for that threat, but we don't believe it's necessary for MAOP re-verification. The rule would expand very specific anomaly response and repair criteria, both inside and outside HCA's, and we would be supportive of a reasonable approach to having a minimum set of standards there for anomaly investigations. But we believe they should not be over-conservative. If you look at the data, pipeline operators right now, about a third of the anomalies we excavate and investigate require repair. 2/3 meet all acceptance criteria and recoded. We believe if the anomaly response criteria is too conservative, that just means more digs that don't result in any type of pipeline safety improvement. We need to focus our attention on those anomalies that are a safety concern. The rule would also require pressure reductions in a very conservative manner for anomalies prior to being investigated, and we urge PHMSA to be very cautious with that because it can have some huge capacity increase and customer impacts. Many pipeline operators are applying a lot of preventive and mitigative actions on its pipeline system, and in many cases, we apply those across the entire system, not just in HCAs. So we're supportive of P&M measures, and maybe some additional measures are warranted. But we want to make sure that those are actions that really do drive some pipeline safety improvements and not do more just to do more. There's some very extensive data integration requirements in the proposed rule. I think there's over 60 attributes that have to be integrated. And we believe that data integration is very important, and operators are already doing that type of thing. I don't know of any way that we could possibly integrate 60 data elements and have a meaningful outcome that would drive decisions. I think there are key attributes we absolutely do need to integrate and would support a rule that would require that. I think similarly, the risk assessment requirements, absolutely risk assessments are very valuable in driving pipeline safety improvements, but there are some things that are not, that would not drive any pipeline safety improvements. So trying to integrate every possible combination of threats probably doesn't drive a lot of improvement or wouldn't drive any decisions. So maybe some refinements there. There are some extensive record-keeping requirements specified in the rule, and I really am supportive of that. I think it's fundamentally important that we are keeping records of all of our activities and our assets. But I hope PHMSA recognizes that historically there have not been those record-keeping requirements. We can't go back and create those records. And so we're very supportive of all those requirements going forward. We have to be cautious on pipelines that are existing and making sure that we reflect some of those records may not be available. To summarize, Spectra Energy strongly supports the concept PHMSA proposes in the rule. We just would like some refinements to make sure it's more practical and we can actually implement these requirements. We believe the final rule should include clear, practical requirements. We want to make sure the rule language is very clear so the operator understands what the expectation is. PHMSA has the same expectation, and the public and other stakeholders understand what the rule requires. I think a clear target is very important in us actually achieving pipeline safety improvements. I think the rule needs to have practicable requirements. We need to be able to implement the requirements and not have a lot of requirements that just drive activities or drive documentation or record keeping that doesn't improve the safety of the pipeline or doesn't drive action or decision making. We believe that the rule should promote expansion of inline inspection. We should be making more lines piggable. There are some provisions in the rule right now that actually are a deterrent to making lines piggable. When you look at, there's a couple requirements that apply in piggable MCAs only. So non-piggable MCAs, those requirements don't apply. So an operator could look at that and say, well, let's see, if I make this line piggable, then I have all these extra requirements within that MCA. That doesn't sound reasonable to us. We think those kind of requirements should just apply to all MCAs, and we really think that we should be converting more of our lines to being piggable. The rule should promote the development of new technologies. We believe that technology can really help us learn more about our pipeline systems and address some pipeline safety concerns without having to take the line out of service and hydrostatically test it. I think that technology is developing very quickly. We just want to make sure that that technology is encouraged by the rule. Some of the requirements for notifications is understandable, but being an operator that has gone through some of that notification process, we feel like that process should be streamlined, or otherwise operators won't want to go down that path. And if operators aren't going to use a new technology, the vendors aren't going to develop that technology. So, And we believe that the new rule should avoid burdensome activities that provide little safety improvement, but take up a lot of an operator's resources and distract it from the important things. Finally, Spectra Energy believes that engagement of all stakeholder groups is critical to develop a diligent, practical, and effective final rule. And I'm very glad that PHMSA is setting up a series of meetings with the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee to walk through this rule. I think that's a very effective way of doing it. And it seemed to work very well for the Pipeline Integrity Management Rule that was passed in 2003. So with that, thank you for the time.